Thank you very much. That pretty much covers it. I mean, I guess if you want to also actually pick up on what I'm doing for the conference, I do blog over at Testhead. My Twitter handle is MKLTesthead. In fact, that's a good way to find me pretty much anywhere on the internet. If you type that string in, MKLTesthead, you're most of the time going to find me. That's the goal and the point of it. Addition to that, yeah, if you want to also follow along on my blog, that's mkltesthead.com. And like I said, I write there fairly regularly, although I'm in this past couple of years, it does seem like most of what I've been writing has been live blogs for conferences, but that's what I'm doing for this one too. So if you want to see what I've said about other people's talks, go for it. Already covered this, so I'll just jump ahead here. I will add one little bit that wasn't on the original slide or my original stuff. If you just look behind me, you'll probably see that there's instruments galore hanging up on the walls and such. I am my second career is that I am a semi-professional musician. I was a professional musician before I started testing 3 decades ago. 3 decades ago. Wow. And by software testing lifestyle, quote unquote, in addition to maintaining my home and family, also keeps me in gear and instruments so that I can continue to be a semi-professional musician in my dotage. I'm the singer for a hard rock heavy metal band called Ensign Red. I'm also a historical reenactor, festival performer, and musician, primarily focusing on Ren fairs, Golden Age of Piracy, and Victorian era. So that's how I keep myself busy in addition to doing all this. So let's go ahead and get right into the meat of the topic. I only have about 35 minutes if you want to have any questions, so I'm going to kind of roll quickly. Accessibility is a very big topic. Most people just basically say, oh, go look at the WCAG standard and make sure everything complies. And frankly, if you're relatively new to accessibility, or even if you're a veteran, that's a cold and cruel thing to throw at somebody to say, here you go, memorize this checklist, make sure everything works. And I don't want to do that. I want to be able to encourage everybody to be effective and be able to talk about accessibility in a more meaningful way than just throwing numbers from a checklist. And so I want to condense this a bit. I want to give you some key areas to focus on, be effective in, identify accessibility issues quickly, help testers become better and more effective advocates for accessibility, because that's the key. If you're not willing to advocate for accessibility, everything I'm going to talk about here is relatively meaningless. And the key here is also, if you're willing to address these kind of questions, you don't have to do a whole lot to provide a tremendous amount of benefit. Let's talk a little bit about what accessibility is. The primary definition of accessibility is we design products so that they are compatible with a person's assistive technology. That means that there is going to be certain situations where additional tech is going to be necessary to get the message across to them. That could be a screen reader. That could be a touch device. That could be a Braille reader. That could be voice-activated software. Those things are necessary to be able to share that information with somebody. So when we say that something is accessible, we are making it possible so that somebody with a primary disability can get to that information. I have a couple of other things I'm going to say about secondary disabilities, and also there is an additional discipline that kind of goes along with this. And if you've ever seen my talks on accessibility before, you know I also cover that secondary discipline, which is called inclusive design. Now, I will be making a little mention in that, but inclusive design looks to solve as many of the problems as accessibility does, but do so without the need for assistive technology. That's the big difference between inclusive design and accessibility. They can both be discussed somewhat together. And if you do a lot of stuff for inclusive design, you're actually making the work for accessibility that much easier, and vice versa. Okay. And so that's the key I want you to be aware of when we're focusing on this. Okay. Why do we need to deal with accessibility? Frankly, if every one of us is lucky enough to live long enough, we're going to have some kind of primary or secondary disability in our lives. Visual, auditory, motor, cognitive, or combine any of the above. I have one right now, in fact. These things that rest on my head, if I take them off, This screen in front of me, even in its nice big type, I can read it, but it's really fuzzy. That's just what happens. That's age onset nearsightedness, because my corneas are hardening. And so I need reading glasses, and that's what these are. Some others are much more profound than that. But even dealing with not just the fact of getting older and needing to wear glasses, which almost everybody is going to have to go through, nearly 1 in 5 people in the United States have some form of disability. There are more than 1 billion people in the world today who experience some form of primary disability. And even those who don't consider themselves disabled have some form of disability. Like I just said, glasses are a primary example. Without them, I'm in trouble in some cases. And I want to make clear that it makes social and economic sense to plan for a better user experience by incorporating design philosophies that address accessibility. Why would you want to lock your customers out, especially if they can pay for your product? It doesn't make sense. In addition to having a primary disability, there's also situational disabilities. And the difference between a primary disability and a situational disability is a primary disability is chronic. It's always with you. Either it is with you from birth, or it is with you from a moment of circumstance, and then you can't get rid of it. The loss of a limb is a primary disability. The breaking of a limb and having to be restrained while it heals is a secondary disability. And there are a number of things that can add to that, like background noise can affect our hearing. Distracted tasking or multiple people trying to get our attention at once can cause cognitive overload. A page that is not scaled to work on a phone and you have to deal with and scan and print, pinch and move to be able to see something and work with it is a vision issue. It's a minor vision issue, but it's still a vision issue. And if you have to deal with a language that you don't already speak or an alphabet you can't read, if I find myself plunked into Japan, I have a little bit of capability with it, but not much. Beyond what I've actually watched in anime, there's only so much Japanese I know, and reading it in the primarily kanji, I'm going to struggle, and that's a fact. So one of the things that I love, and I use this as my primary example when I try to explain a good use of accessibility, and one that we can look at, and it's also a good use of inclusive design, is IKEA. Now, we can talk about IKEA and the frustrations we have building their stuff all we want to. That's for a whole nother talk. But what I want to talk about is their instructions and what they do very well. And what they do very well is that their instructions are almost entirely pictographs and images. What does that do? It removes, in most cases, any literacy issues. It doesn't matter what language you speak. If I speak English and somebody else speaks Korean and we have the same set of instructions, we can build the same project with the same level of success. And none of us is locked out from that. That cuts down the cost of repetitive printing, which has a bottom line effect, as well as that customer experience improvement. Many years ago, 2007 timeframe, Jeremy Siddick wrote Design Accessible Websites for the Pragmatic Programmers Publishing. And this is my go-to book. It's a little old now, but it's still my go-to book. And the biggest thing I share from this are the 10 principles of web mobile accessibility. So I'm going to rattle through these pretty quickly. So read along with me if you so choose. You should avoid making assumptions about the physical, mental, and sensory abilities of your users whenever possible. Don't try to overthink it. Basically, deal with them where they're at. Your users' technologies are capable of sending and receiving text. That's about all you'll ever be able to assume. Users' time and technology belongs to them, not to us. If I had to say the one thing that we need to really emphasize, it's number 3. Never take control of either without a really good reason. Provide good text alternatives for any non-text content. Use widely available technologies to reach your audience. Use clear language to communicate your message. Make your sites usable, searchable, and navigable. I will be discussing this in a little bit when we get to the actual sections about disabilities and design approaches. Design your content for semantic meaning and maintain separation between content and presentation. Again, keep it simple. Progressively enhance your basic content by adding extra features, and allow it to degrade gracefully for users who can't or don't wish to use them. The key for number 9, and more simply put, is don't change the world at once. Don't introduce a whole bunch of new features at one time and expect everybody to catch up with it. It's overwhelming. Likewise, don't take things away from people that they're used to using just because you don't think that it's a good idea or there's a better approach. Always ask if you can. And 10, as you encounter new web technologies or new mobile technologies or Internet of Things or any other computer-assisted capability, apply these same principles to make them accessible. Okay, so now we're going to get into areas of disability, how we define them. Mobility issues. It is the most visible disability. If you are missing or you have immobile limbs or extremities, chronic cases, you literally are missing a limb and you cannot work with it. If you've broken an arm and it's going to take you 4 to 6 weeks to have it healed and you genuinely can't use it and it's bound to your body to heal properly, for those 4 to 6 weeks, you are dealing with a primary disability. Afterwards, your healing time, if you can basically move it, you might have a secondary. You also can lose fine motor control. If you have a disease like Parkinson's disease, for example, that shaky, that tremor to try to be able to use a mouse or do other things can be very difficult. So these are the most common secondary and situational disabilities. So what are things that we can do to maximize and make mobility issues less painful? Number 1, ensure all functions can be accessed with the keyboard. Don't assume that somebody's going to be able to operate a mouse. Use tabs and skip links to get to the main content. If you have a limited use of limbs or you're only able to operate something, say, with a touch stick, as you see in the picture here, this is an example of a capacitance touch stick that's held in the mouth. They use the the body model for electrical conduit to be able to send the electrical impulses to the end of the stick to manipulate it. Now, if you're using that stick to also operate your keyboard, you don't want to have to type a whole lot to get to what you need. Again, test your products with a capacitive touch stick or touch pen. And that's exactly what this user is doing right here. And number 4, can you drive your application with voice recognition software? This is a really good test of your patience and tolerance for how to navigate something. If you struggle to do it yourself, bet absolutely your customers who have that need will struggle to do it too. Vision issues are probably the second most common physical disability. And total blindness is the one that we usually hear about the most. Most people, when they hear about accessibility, they think about screen readers, and that's basically it. And that's what most people focus on because that's where they think that the biggest bang for the buck is. And in a manner of speaking, it kind of is. There are definite issues, though, that all of us might come into contact with. Like I said, refractive error is the most common one. Nearsightedness, farsightedness, astigmatism, or again, that age-induced corneal hardening so that your lens doesn't autofocus as well anymore. Cataracts are a condition of age, also of some medical conditions, macular degeneration, and another one, interestingly enough, that affects more men than it does women is color blindness. And color blindness can vary considerably from very profound to minor, but still make it difficult to tell different shades of colors apart. So with that in mind, there are also secondary additions. Like if you have your eyes dilated as part of a vision procedure, that might be a few hours you have to deal without being able to use your eyes effectively. Stepping out in the bright sunlight and trying to see something on our phone or a device is momentarily difficult, but it might be a situation that you have to deal with. And if you have a corneal abrasion because of sand or dust, and you can't wear your contact lenses for a while, and you don't have access to your glasses, you might find yourself stuck. Again, each of those are temporary. but each of those benefit from a combination. So what are some design considerations that we can ask about? And realize I'm not necessarily saying, hey, here's a tool you need to use to confirm if you are doing this or not. Most of these are coming in the form of questions or standards you can easily address. Now, right here for use appropriate color contrast, this is something that a tool like WebAIM or Axe can quickly identify for you, and you can run it on your pages and go, hey, you know what? We have a contrast issue here. We will not be compliant if we keep it as it is right now. There might be some reasons for you to do that, and you can discuss them, but here's where you have the question. And this is a nice, easy one that you can use for any text in any background. If you are using medium-sized bold or unbold text, you want to use 4.5 to 1 as the ratio of contrast. And if you're using small unbold text, you want to use a ratio of 7 to 1. Those are two easy to remember numbers that you can always bring up. And if you run it and you don't get them, you can just go, hey, this isn't going to map. Can we please fix this? You want to be able to enable scalable fonts. And scalable fonts means that if you scale text, the area fills with text, but it doesn't blow off the page or mess up the whole page outline or move things out of the way where you can't see them. Put all the information you need to deal with on a page, because if you're going to be using a screen reader, you want to be able to access everything so that they can interact with it without having to go through undue steps. Avoid using color alone to display meaning. Yeah, red means stop, green means go, yellow means caution. What happens if you can't tell the difference between red and green? Have words that go with it. It's the key that I'm trying to say with that. Make pages as linear as possible. If you break things up into lots of tables and having to jump around into little frames and such to be able to interact with something, that's going to be very difficult for a low sight user to be able to navigate. And don't separate elements that go together. If for some reason you need to expand a page and look at an entry for a, say a login screen, don't make it so that your button, because you've expanded it, is now off the screen and inaccessible. That's not helpful. And there are some considerations you can consider for screen readers. And the good news is that screen readers are readily available. There are a number of open source versions. Orca is a good example. There's also NVDA. JAWS is a proprietary pay-for system. It's probably the most powerful, but most of the standards that it uses are also used by other services, and they do have some proprietary stuff that, again, it's fairly well known, but you have to pay for it. You don't need to develop to a JAWS standard if you use the Orca and if you use NVDA. But describe images or provide transcripts for videos. Make content easy to navigate. Again, skip links are a really good thing. If you go and hit your tab key the one time, it says, hey, guess what? If you click on this link right here, we'll take you to the main page and the main content. Beautiful. Bypasses all navigation. Provide keyboard-only options to complete a task. If you have links, make the links text descriptive. Click here is horribly unhelpful, especially if it appears multiple times on a page. Click here to go to the registration. That's good. Click here to fill in your credit card information. That's good. But just click here by itself without any other context, not good. Make sure that all images have alt tags and have descriptive alt text. If the picture is there to help communicate what's going on here, then you want to be able to tell the non-sighted user that that picture has semantic meaning. And do so without just saying picture or car. If it's a car that's parked on Ventura Boulevard and somebody's walking to get gas, say that. And make sure that tables have and values and that inputs have labels. That helps you be able to explain, oh, I'm dealing with a table, and here's the next cell. Or, hey, I have an input and it's looking for this information, so it will tell you. Auditory issues, meaning dealing with your ears, can range everywhere from mild to profound. To give you an example, this is the range that is considered for mild hearing loss, moderate, severe, and profound. Anything lower than 30 decibels is a mild hearing issue. I can say for myself, because of my career in music, I'm included in that list a little bit. If there's conversation going on around me and another sound that's competing that I have to listen to, I will struggle. That's a fact. Moderate hearing loss is anything lower than 50 decibels. So if you get right next to your refrigerator when it kicks on the sound of it running, and you can't hear that, that means you have moderate hearing loss, and a hearing aid is probably in your future. Severe hearing loss is anything lower than 80 decibels. That's like your average alarm clock going off. If you can't hear that, yeah, hearing aid's not going to help you. And profound hearing loss is pretty close to total deafness, anything lower than 95 decibels. That's the sound of a passing subway train. And to give you some more examples of auditory zones, this is a list that we have to be able to see where do you stand and where would you struggle to hear things, and how long could you tolerate these sounds before your hearing was in a risky place. And again, in most of these you'll notice are based around loud music, because hey, that's what I deal with a lot of the time. You can have situational disabilities with auditory issues too. If you're in a noisy restaurant and someone calls you, you're probably not going to be able to have a good conversation. And if you happen to have an ear infection, that's also going to probably make you struggle too. So what are some auditory design considerations? Are there text alternatives where possible? And again, text alternatives, alt text and all that is not just for people who can't see, because they're going to be listening for this. That alt text is not just a hearing aid, it's also a visual aid. So if you can't hear what's going on, being able to see the alt text is very helpful. Is the page design smooth and simple? You might think if you have profound hearing loss, how is that going to be an issue? Well, because if you're not quite able to deal with or look at things, and if you get just flooded with text, that can be just as difficult as not being able to hear the thing that you want to work with. Are audio signals used alone as cues? Don't do this. You should always, if for example, you have a file uploading and it's going to alert you when it's done, that alert should not just be a ping. That alert should also be a text box that pops up and says, hey, this thing is done. Are there a variety of ways to communicate? You shouldn't have to only communicate with, say, a chat. You should be able to use a chat bot. You should be able to use a voice cue. You should be able to have some way to be able to do multiple things. And what you're going to notice is a number of these are going to work at cross purposes sometimes. You're going to say, well, if I optimize for the hearing impaired and visual, am I going to now be diminishing the effect for those who are sight impaired? And so your goal is to say, what's the happy medium? Or how close to a happy medium can we get? And in most cases, you can solve both. Every once in a while, solving one literally solves the other. And every once in a while, solving one might have a detrimental effect on the other. And so you'll have to make a compromise. Those are rare, but they do happen. Alt tag, as I said, alt tag isn't just for screen readers. And there are new HTML5 features like track and VTT files for longer text. And again, these are synced in, which allow you to say, if you have an audio file that's listed, plus you have a track file, this gives you the ability of playing that audio file and seeing the closed caption in real time. And again, also, just like with HTML5, because of their semantics, use a transcript tag to identify a transcript. That makes it easy for you to go, hey, that's what I need to look at. The last area that we're going to cover is cognitive issues. And cognitive issues are really broad, and the ones that are most likely to be overlooked and the least understood. And because there are a number of possible causes, we might have to come up with a set of solutions rather than just one. So example of cognitive issues, there are from birth issues like Down syndrome and autism and Asperger's syndrome, each of which has their own gradient of issues to deal with. You also can look at later onset of dementia, where you're unable to remember things, or it has a profound effect on what you are able to interact with. There's also dyslexia and dyscalculia. And in this case, I just wanted to show you a quick simulator. This is called Funkify. and it's a browser plugin. And one of the things you can do is you can select a number of individual examples to simulate what it would be like to work with your page and see what you might want to do for accessibility purposes. And in this case, I picked a dyslexia filter at about the middle. And as you see here, this simulates what you would need to do or how your users might see your page if they have dyslexia. And you can make it lighter or really intense. Also, cognitive disabilities can be situational. Drop me into a foreign country where I can't really read what's going on. I now am, for all practical purposes, cognitively disabled and, more profoundly, kind of illiterate. Put me in a distracted or stressed or emotional state, and now I have to take care of solving a problem. I might just shut down and not be able to work with it at all. And for anybody, if you have to wade through dense, minimally formatted and punctuated text, it's going to be painful for everybody. So here are some design considerations that I want you to look for in the cognitive space. Is content structured with clear headings, sections, paragraphs, and list? Make space where possible and communicate as clearly as you can. Does the user interface avoid overly bright or contrasting colors? Remember what I just said before about struggling with if you don't have enough contrast? And now I'm telling you, well, what if it's overly bright or there's too much contrast? Working at opposite ends, right? Not necessarily. The solution would be, hey, is there some way that I personally can move or modify the contrast? And if I can, then that will be very helpful. It's like, oh, that's really bright. Here, let me move this. Okay, good. I'm happy there. Oh, I can't see it well enough. Let me move the contrast. Good. It's possible to do two things at the same time. Text alternatives being provided, being able to hover over and see what's going on there if you can't make sense of what the control is. Use breadcrumbs if you are going into a deep site. If you need to keep track of something and then you need to jump out and go someplace else, having a breadcrumb to see where you are is very helpful. I'm going to argue this is not necessarily an accessibility or inclusive design thing. This is usability 101. If you have the ability of doing that, to be able to say, oh, okay, I've looked for something here, and I want to go look for something here, and it makes sense to jump one layer back and then another layer forward, do that. It's a lot easier than having to mouse around and jump and question and search for stuff. Provide options for text resizing. Again, if you can go from 100 to 200 without completely blowing out the page, that's ideal. The abbreviation and acronym HTML tags allow you to put something in that tag. So if you use an acronym, you can hover over it and go, oh, guess what? This acronym means this. And one other piece. If you have justified text, meaning hard left, hard right, justified text, the way that they have done in newspapers for years to keep those columns absolutely crisp, that's a struggle for many people who deal with dyslexia and other cognitive issues. So unless there is a really good reason for why you need to have hard left and right justified text, push it to the left, push it to the right, or put it in the center. Make a choice. Whew. Whirlwind. So in conclusion, design decisions that you make early in the life cycle of products can have a profound effect on how people use your product. They can either be excellent solutions or genuine nightmares. The farther along a product gets in its development, the more difficult it is to make modifications to its design. If you get into a place where, hey, we've been working with this product for a decade, and now all of a sudden we need to work on accessibility and we need to make our product accessible, I can assure you that's going to be a difficult road to hoe. If you, however, are starting greenfield and say, hey, let's focus on accessibility early in this, or this is a new project, we don't have any old constraints, let's focus on accessibility in the here and now, that's going to help you considerably, and so that you don't have so much trouble later on if you have to modify something down the road. And finally, I want you to think of applications that you would want to use and think about yourself in the future with the possibility that a disability may be part of your everyday experience.
Michael, I'll stop you there. You're almost finished, but we have still 9 minutes and we have one question from Jessica.
Awesome.
If you want me to read it out loud, you can.
Are there accessibility standards for implementing multi-factor authentication? Yeah, that's ugly. Are there standards for it? There are some standards for it. However, I will tell you right now, because you are looking at getting multiple pieces of information to work with each other, that's going to be tricky. What I would suggest is, I know that they deal with authentication issues in WCAG. Off the top of my head, I want to say it's in section 4, and it's going to depend on where you are too. But yes, you can deal with it. Exactly how you deal with it is going to vary on what choice of two-factor authentication you wish to use. But yes, the point being is that if you're sending to your phone and your phone is getting a code, it can read it aloud. And in some cases, that's going to be effective for that individual. But then again, it's also reading it aloud. So you're going to have to make some choices. Can it be done? Yes. Is it going to be an easy thing to do? Probably not. I don't know if that answers your question, but like so many things, it's really one thing I want to make a mention here too, is that it is really very easy to get all caught up in, hey, we're doing all this neat stuff and we're doing all this great accessibility, these great accessibility features, and we're 100% compliant with the WCAG standard. Now, you can have a 100% compliant product, and that product can still be a nightmare to use. It can still be a royal pain in the neck and absolutely unusable from a usability perspective, but it's 100% compliant. So that's a balancing act that you need to be able to kind of manipulate and say, just because we're compliant, is this actually a solution that I would want to use? When in doubt, put yourself in that user's position and try to see if by making something compliant, are you making that product easier to use by making it accessible, or are you making it more difficult or more frustrating to use for everybody else? A good accessible site should not be frustrating for other users. In fact, they should never know the difference. There's a neat site you can look at for the W3C, for the accessibility initiative. That's a before and after site. It shows you a bad unaccessible site, and it shows you a good accessible site that you can compare right next to each other. And the key is, most people that look at these sites say, I don't notice a difference at all. And that's the point. Accessibility should, in most circumstances, be invisible to a normative user. They should never notice that there are accessibility features there. But if they want to take advantage of them, then they can. If accessibility features start to intrude into regular use and make it difficult, that's a problem, and it should be addressed. Any other questions? How are we doing? 2:25.
You have 5 minutes.
Wow.
We wait. It was good timing. We wait for more questions. I'm going to share the links for the survey.
Sure. We could wait for more questions. Also, again, I would recommend, if anybody really wants to get into this, the WCAG standard and the W3C site are good places to go and start and dig in and play around and practice. I deliberately kept the tools out of this, but since we got a few minutes, I can recommend some of my favorites. WebAIM is a real quick tool to get into using. They have it either as a browser plugin, or you can just go to webaim.org as a site and plug in a page and play around with it and see what works and what doesn't. and play around to see how you can make those happen. Developer tools, Axe by Dex Systems is a really good tool that you can utilize if you want to get into doing automation for accessibility. The Axe core library plugs into a number of languages, and you can utilize it, and you can set up your tests to run. You can run accessibility tests in, say, WebDriver, for example. And as you load pages, does it meet the requirements? Yes. If you want to go through and do a scan and say, yep, we're good for color contrast. No, we're not. And here's where we're not. You can actually go through and record those and make a nice little table listing and, format it as you want to with the programming language of your choice. And then you can go and present that and say, here we go. Here's our site. Here are all the pages where we're out of conformance for contrast. And here's all the pages where we are in conformance. Thank you. 1 out of 5 users is too large a market share to ignore. Yes, it is. That is literally 20% of the market. If you were to say you're going to ignore 20% of the market for any other product, they would say you're a lunatic. That's too much to leave on the table. And yet we do it all the time when it comes to accessibility.